So I just want to start by saying it's an honor and a privilege to be back with everyone again today. I see a lot of familiar names and faces in the chat. And for those of you that it might be the first time you've attended one of my sessions, I want to take just a moment before we jump in and explore this key facet of Dr. Montessori's teaching to introduce myself as the host and the creator of this presentation. So my name is Heather White. I'm a former Montessori classroom teacher, administrator, and in-home caregiver with more than 15 years of experience in the world of Montessori. I currently work as an educational coach. I work in multiple roles and capacities with the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, including as their alumni, conference, webinar, and professional development coordinator. And I'm also an instructional guide where I support adult learners who are working to receive their Montessori certification with them. I'm a blog writer and content creator for various organizations like the American Montessori Society, Guide and Grow, and Miru's Toys. And I recently am excited to announce that I accepted a position as an adjunct professor at Sarasota University, which is the first fully accredited, fully Montessori university. So that's
Whoa, excellent.
something
So it's
I'm
at the
excited
university
about.
level, teaching future teachers of Montessori.
Correct. There are two bachelor's programs, two master's programs, and they're working on introducing a doctoral program next year. And the focuses are Montessori education and Montessori leadership.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I also hold certifications from the American Montessori Society with the 3 to 6 and 6 to 9 levels, and have experience working with the 0 to 3 and 9 to 12 populations as well. I have a master's degree in education with a concentration in Montessori studies and an education specialist degree in school psychology. And I'm also a nationally certified school psychologist. So during
That's
our time together today, just to kind of ground our work, we're going to cover lots of different things. We'll start out by discussing what the absorbent mind is, and then we'll discover its two distinct stages that Dr. Montessori called the unconscious and the conscious mind. We'll talk about what the absorbent mind reveals and how it reveals itself through this process of language acquisition and the building of one's identity. We'll review then the four distinct parts or pillars that Dr. Montessori described of the absorbent mind, the horm, which is the inner teacher, the nimi, and then the nebulae. And then we'll close by talking about how Montessori develops a prepared environment and how it encourages us as the adult to develop this prepared environment that really supports the exposure and the development itself of the absorbent mind. And then I'll share some resources if you're interested in learning more as well. As I often do, I wanted to start our time together today with a quote to really help us focus in on today's topic and give us some inspiration as we learn more. So when she was speaking about the absorbent mind in one of her London lectures during 1946, Dr. Maria Montessori said, "A marvelous fact is that the absorbent mind never feels fatigue. It is just like a camera. It clicks and everything is there all of a sudden." And I think this really describes how learning happens for very young children during those first 6 years of life. If you I know for me personally, how many times I've said, wow, I wish I could just absorb some of their energy. I wish when I was working with toddlers, like if I could just harness some of that, right? Because I feel like I'm always tired as an adult, and she was never tired. They're never tired. They're just always so excited. Life is so wonderful, and there's so much to learn and do. And then also the idea, we talked about the absorbent mind being like a sponge already, but the idea that it's like their minds are like cameras. They can just take a picture and naturally soak in all of this information so organically and so easily. So the absorbent mind is one of the most foundational, one of the most crucial ideas in early childhood education that Dr. Maria Montessori introduced. She presented this fundamental and foundational concept to the world more than 100 years ago during her initial observations with children. Like we've said, the absorbent mind has this sponge-like capacity to just soak in information from the environment, soak in the information that's necessary for what Dr. Montessori described as a young child's need to develop their individuality, to create themselves, if you will, from and within their specific culture. It's the quality of the child's mind up through the age of 6. And then there's this transition to what we call the reasoning mind that then we have as adolescents and adults. What takes place in during this period of the absorbent mind, like I said, is taken in really effortlessly, but truly lays the foundation for the child's entire personality for their entire lifetime. To compare the absorbent mind with the reasoning mind, so looking at what the mind is like before the age of 6 and then what happens thereafter, let's compare a photograph and a drawing. So I put two images here of a window, the one on the top to be a drawing and the one on the bottom to be an actual image of like a photograph. So in the photograph, you can see that every detail is captured exactly as it is. The color, texture, the angle, the view outside the window, it's fixed and it remains just as it was precisely at the moment that the picture was taken. In the drawing, though, the detail varies. The artist decides how much or how little detail that they want to add or include. It could be the artist's representation of a window. So it could be very idealistic, right? Or very representative, but not necessarily true to exactly what's being seen. And it might even be something that's not even possible in real life, right? So the absorbent mind is like that photograph. It's like that camera taking that picture. What the child takes in during the first 6 years of life, during this absorbent mind period, really is like a snapshot. It is an exact picture of what's happening. And then they're able to use that picture later when they transition to the reasoning mind to work through using their conscious memory and their conscious mind to further explore and develop things. But the absorbent mind and what's taken in during that period really lays the foundation for the work that happens uh, with one's personality and with one's intelligence within their mind in later years, like I said, in elementary years, adolescence, and even into adulthood. So the absorbent mind really is the foundation, the framework to one's development throughout their lifetime. According to Dr. Maria Montessori, the absorbent mind can be divided into two distinct stages. The first is the unconscious stage, and the second is known as the conscious stage. The unconscious stage takes place in those first 3 years, so from birth to 3 years of age. During this time, the child absorbs information unknowingly or unconsciously. They learn to sit, to stand, to walk, to speak even without any conscious effort. It just happens very naturally, very organically. An infant will look at everything around them intently without discrimination or choice. They're just taking it all in. Think about a young child that you might lay on the floor and they just stare up at the ceiling or at the wall, or if you're outside, up at the sky. They're just taking it all in. And a child during these first 3 years often mimics what they see. And then as they begin to speak, what they hear as well. The unconscious powers, Dr. Montessori said, don't have any aims or purposes. For example, the infant who's lying down on their back is strengthening their spine and their muscles, but they're not aware that that's happening. They're not intentionally doing that. It's just happening very organically. The child acts, Dr. Montessori said, simply in keeping with the laws of nature. They're just doing what happens naturally, what occurs to them without them even knowing. And during this period, the child begins to acquire from their environment a language. They learn to think in that language, they learn to hear in that language, And they also absorb the customs around them that they internalize that becomes part of them. So, this is why it's so critical during these first 3 years of life if the child's hearing a lot of spoken language. And if you live in a multilingual household or in a multilingual society, that the child's hearing both or all of those languages to really soak them in, but then also that they're exposed to really wonderful and important aspects of their culture as well, because that's when they're really going to start to internalize those things because they're soaking it all in. Even though they might not be doing anything with that information consciously, like we said before, it's laying the foundation for their personality and for that embracing of that culture that will happen at a later stage. The next stage, then, taking place from 3 to 6 years of age, is called the conscious stage. Around the age of 3, we start to see the emergence of consciousness. This is where memory starts to begin. Children start to develop memories and also conscious awareness. They become very consciously aware of their surroundings. The child still has that sponge like capacity, that sponge like mind to absorb information very easily. But now the child consciously seeks out certain experiences. In this phase, the child is expanding on newly developed abilities. They're predisposed to learning things like order, sequencing, music, numbers, letter sounds. Those are some of those sensitive periods we talked about if you were part of that class previously. A sensitive period is when a child goes through a stage, they have a heightened ability to gain new knowledge or master a new skill. And all of those things we just discovered, movement, order, tiny details, music, numbers, letter sounds, reading, all of those things are sensitive periods that children go through within these first 6 years of life. And they eventually then lead to academic skills, right? To math, to reading, to writing. So they're laying the groundwork from birth, but it's around this period in the conscious stage of 3 to 6 that those pieces start to come together, that they're predisposed to learning specific facts that they're consciously drawn to. During this time, the child also begins to show a strong desire to be independent. They want to start to do things without any help. Interestingly, my grandparents raised me. So my grandparents tell a funny story around this age is when I often said the phrase, me do it, because I wanted to do everything myself. And if you've been around a toddler, you know that that is very much true for all of them, that they start to want to do things on their own. They want to be the masters of their own minds, bodies, and environment, Dr. Montessori said. And the adult who gives them unnecessary help or creates this dependency on them becomes an obstacle to the child. So, like Dr. Lambert was saying in the beginning, that sometimes happens in certain cultures. If we step in and we provide this assistance or we redirect the child, uh, we are actually becoming what Dr. Montessori called an obstacle to their development. We are impeding them from becoming really independent, which is, I think, what we all want for children once they step into adolescence and adulthood is to be able to be confident, capable, independent human beings. The absorbent mind can really be encapsulated and realized, and the power of it recognized through the process of learning a language, through the process of language acquisition. If you've ever tried to learn a second language later in life, you know it's not easy at all. But a young child learns to speak a language and sometimes more than one just effortlessly. How does that happen? As adults, that's really perplexing to us, but it happens because of the absorbent mind. Dr. Maria Montessori speaks of the absorbent mind related to this process of language acquisition in her book that's titled The Formation of Man. And she says, the absorbent mind is indeed a marvelous gift to humanity. By merely living and without any conscious effort, the individual absorbs from the environment even a complex cultural achievement like language. So the idea is, although we can foster this development. We can foster and promote this language acquisition by creating a really language rich environment, reading stories to our children, sports casting, telling them what we're doing while we're doing it, right? Something as simple as, I'm going to get a drink of water, or I'm going to get the butter out of the refrigerator while you're cooking, telling them what you're doing so that they learn to hear and absorb this vocabulary for all different things. Engaging them in reciprocal conversations, even as infants, you can ask questions and pause and wait. Maybe they utter some kind of babbling, but you're not able to understand what they're saying yet, but you're laying all that groundwork for the child to absorb the language. And even though we can do all of those things that help aid this process, it will still happen even if we don't do all of that. Even if we're not taking those extra steps, children will very organically absorb and acquire the language that surrounds them. Not only do they acquire their language and absorb their language very organically, but they also soak in the traits of their families and their communities. They learned how and what to eat. They learn how to behave in certain situations. Some of that may be consciously taught and often is consciously taught, especially as the child gets a little older. But a great deal of it is simply absorbed through this powerful child mind, this powerful absorbent mind. Children absorb through a process that Maria Montessori called mental chemistry. And they actually start to build themselves, they start to build their identity during this time just through what they absorb because they're mimicking all of these aspects, all of these cultural traits, all of these familial characteristics and traits. They're absorbing that and mimicking it even from such a very young age. So now we're going to get into the four distinct parts of the absorbent mind that Dr. Maria Montessori described. These are the four pillars that she talked about. And their definition borrows very predominantly, very heavily from the work of the English educator Sir Percy Nunn, who was one of Dr. Maria Montessori's contemporaries. It's thought that they might have done some work parallel or even together. So the first of the four pillars of the absorbent mind is called the horn. And in Greek mythology, the horn signifies the energetic impulse or spirit. In Montessori, horn is the drive that compels the child to exert themselves, to come into contact with the environment and to learn. So it's almost like a motor is driving them, right? We talked about that when we went through the sensitive period several classes back. Again, remember the sensitive period is that time when a child has a heightened ability to gain new knowledge or master some new skill. So you can think about the child that's learning to walk. They might even skip their nap every day for a period of time just to keep practicing. They fall down over and over again, but they get right back up and want to try again. You would think that they would become discouraged or frustrated, but it's like they have this internal drive, this motivation, almost that they're compelled to keep trying to learn how to walk. And that happens with other things as well outside of movement. We can kind of relate it to or compare it to the willpower that we have as adults. But it's really quite distinct in the fact that it's innate, there's not some extrinsic motivation for them to do it. It's something that's internal. It's unconscious. They don't know that it's happening. And it's absolutely irresistible. It's like they can't resist the urge to practice these skills or to try to gain this knowledge. Um, I think what it's important to think about in that capacity, right? We talked about our role as the adult earlier, and we get into some of that. So think about if we're the adult and we're trying to interrupt. Let's say the child is trying to learn how to stand and they're standing and they're falling and they're standing and they're falling. If we try to distract them or take them away from that work, imagine how frustrating that would be. That's where the child's discouragement and frustration comes from, is our interference as the adults. It would be just like if we had a project we were working on and we really, really were so driven to do this project and we wanted to finish it and it was all we could think about. And someone told us, no, you need to put that away and move on to something else. That's the kind of frustration and discouragement that children feel if we interfere while they're trying to move through this energetic impulse or spirit known as the horn. The next pillar, the second pillar, is the inner teacher. So if we think of form as the motor or the engine, the inner teacher then can be thought of as the steering wheel. Maria Montessori observed the peculiar fact that children tend to meet different milestones on average at the same time, much like we still recall and say today, so that they learn how to sit up, to walk, to stand, to talk, to babble, to all of these things are milestones that children typically hit or are able to accomplish or do at the same time or about the same time. But she also noticed that far more complex things, far more complex abilities, things like peer interaction, a sense of fairness, morality, justice, things like drawing and painting, more creative endeavors, that even these more complex abilities also happen around the same time for children. Even in cultures that are far removed from one another on opposite ends or sides of the planet, right? The children seem to exhibit the same general interests, the same modes of playing, the same behavioral tendencies at about the same time. So she concluded, with all of that observation and knowledge, that there must be some kind of built in schedule for us as human beings, a psychic blueprint, she called it, if you will, or an inner teacher that keeps time for the child, that keeps track of their time and their development, and guides them to seek out, interact with, and even master different aspects of their environment at specific times, which gives rise to those sensitive periods that we've talked about a few times already during our session today. The third pillar then um, is known as the NEMI. So what's with the absorbent part of the mind, the sponge we've talked about? The memory of a child works very differently. Their mind is prepared for information in a much different way than ours as adults. Instead of simply learning information and storing it more or less permanently, depending on the part of the memory that we're using, the child's using their experiences to really construct themselves. It's building who they are, it's building their personality. So, to this end, the absorbent mind is equipped with a different kind of base memory. And this is what Maria Montessori called the NEMI, which was named after the Greek muse of memory. Although it doesn't allow for conscious recall later in life, right? We don't have those memories that we can refer back to. The information and the experience that are stored in the NEMI during these first 6 years of life really truly shape our personality, our character, and our behavior for the entire span of our lifetime. The NEMI is the prevalent form of memory during the first 3 years of life. And then after that, it gradually is replaced by more conscious memory. In adulthood, the NEMI can still be activated and actualized and affected by really emotional experiences. But usually it's factors that impact our behavioral, the way we behave, if you will, on a more unconscious level. So if you think about a time that you've been in a really high intensity situation that has evoked this really strong emotional response for you, you can think about how you often might have operated in a way that was unconscious. You weren't thinking about it later, you weren't even aware of what you were doing at the time. And that's how we activate and affect our base memory or our NEMI, that was our mind that we were fully involved and invested in during those first 3 years of our life. And finally, the fourth pillar, Dr. Maria Montessori described as the nebulae, which is the distinct potentials, she said, of the human being. So she proposed that the characteristics that give rise to our shared humanity as a people, things like language, music, mathematical thinking, are really enormous latent potentialities that are just waiting to be awakened through experiences with the environment. So, for instance, a person who's never exposed to music in childhood might not develop their musicality even if they had these intrinsic talents. But musicality is dormant in every newborn. So she really said if we provide them the experiences, we provide them the environment that they can explore all of these interests and all of these natural talents, that is what allows these things to come to life and to come to fruition and to really develop themselves and expose themselves in a child's life. So much like a nebula can give birth to a star from its mass or be dispersed and then destroyed, the nebula of the absorbent mind can be actualized into ability, right? That's the person that becomes a musician because of these experiences in infancy and toddlerhood and young childhood, or it can be lost forever through a lack of experience and exposure and stimulation. So it might be a child that never recognized or actualized their musical talents because they didn't have exposure to singing or to instruments when they were very young. Maria Montessori's understanding of the power of the absorbent mind in these first 6 years of life really empowers us to be mindful of the need to prepare this rich environment for the young child that provides them the exposure to these so many things that they can organically absorb from their surroundings. We need to feed what we were just talking about here, right? The nebula. We need to feed the nebula by offering them all of these experiences that they can kind of soak in and absorb from their surroundings. So, a properly designed Montessori classroom is known as the prepared environment. Your home setting can also be a prepared environment as long as you are making a conscious effort to accommodate a young child's absorbent mind and broaden their horizons, engaging and encouraging their curiosity. Because the absorbent mind depends on being able to draw in useful information from one's surroundings, children benefit from a really beautiful, visually appealing, safe, comforting space. So Montessori classrooms are often very bright and welcoming. They're a calm space. They're not overstimulating. They create this sense of safety and a welcoming community where children feel a sense of comfort. They feel a sense of belonging and a sense of security that encourages them and invites them to explore. It really like calls to them. Dr. Montessori even used the word seduces them, that the classroom is set up in a way that they're drawn in to explore more. So from language and math to things like geography, culture, the arts, the materials that are available to children in a Montessori classroom give them really ample opportunities for discovery. It awakens that nebula and allows children to really follow their interests and investigate what's intriguing to them at any given moment. And you can mimic that same thing in the home setting as well. So, if you're interested in learning more about the absorbent mind, I really strongly encourage you to go right to the source to start with. I highly recommend Maria Montessori's book by the same title, The Absorbent Mind. This is an analysis of the physical and psychological aspects of a child's growth during those first 6 years of life that she deemed the most significant period of life. It deals with the construction of the human personality, how learning develops. It really shares her revolutionary ideas about education being an aid to life, how Montessori is an aid to life. And it indicates how fundamental this first 6 years of life, this period of formation, of self formation, is, according to Dr. Maria Montessori. I do want to say it is a pretty dense read. So it does take a little while to get through and perhaps a few repeated readings, but it is very worth it. And it's just a treasure trove of information. But if you're looking for more pragmatic, practical, more easily digestible information, you can learn a little bit. There's not a wealth of information, but you can learn a little bit about the absorbent mind and some other books like The Montessori Baby and The Montessori Toddler by Simone Davies, and also through various trusted Montessori blogs and websites. You can find a host of information just by doing a general Google search on what the absorbent mind is. Just as we began, I wanted to end here with a quote before we open it up for questions to leave us with something to think about and even a task to embrace. So, in another one of her London lectures in 1946, Dr. Maria Montessori spoke about the absorbent mind again, stating, "Children have an absorbent mind. They absorb knowledge from the environment without fatigue," just like we said before, right? Then she went on to say, "This is the moment in the life of man when we can do something for the betterment of humanity and further brotherhood." So, as the adults, it's our job to really help promote and fuel the child's absorbent mind, which is what's going to allow them to embrace this formative period of learning and really then the development of this betterment of humanity, because they're forming themselves, which is then allowing them to go out into society and make more meaningful connections with others as well. So it's really a powerful role that we have as the adults to honor and respect what's happening during this first 6 years of a child's life. And before I open up the floor to final questions, I just wanted to say thank you so much once again for being here today. It was an honor and a privilege, like always. I've shared my contact information with you here. If you have any questions after today's presentation, feel free to send me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd also love, just realized my website is not there, so I will get the link and pop that in the chat for you. And I would also love for you to visit my website and my social media accounts, which is at montessori.matters. I share a lot of Montessori and other education and parenting related content that hopefully you all will find really helpful.